We have had some great programs over the last 2 days, and now we're on part two. We're on the back nine with more education and inspiration. We're going to kick it off right away this morning with an incredible wildlife photographer named Michelle Valberg. She's been shooting for many years and goes to places up north around Canada that I would love to go to, photographing polar bears and so many other birds and species. And her work is just epic. She's going to inspire us today. Let me introduce the Nikon Theater stage, Michelle Valberg, Nikon Ambassador.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, good morning. It's so great to be here at CES again, and I promise I won't take the power down this year. That's my plan anyway. I am living a dream job. Every day I'm so fortunate to be able to do what I love and to go out into nature and spend time with these incredible animals. I also do portraits in Ottawa, so I have this very career where I'm in the studio and I'm in control and I can tell the client what to do and I'm in control with my light, and then I go out into the wild and I have this whole different experience when I'm completely out of control. I spend a lot of time in the backyard, in my backyard. I do a lot of work out of my kayak, and I love to explore the places that I know the best. Every time that I go out, it's a different experience. The animals are different. The light is different. I spend a lot of time with the loons, and every kind of bird, any kind of animal that I can see that I have an opportunity to photograph. There we go. So as much as I love going away to far exotic places and spending time in the Arctic, I also love to spend time just with the simplicity of what we see every day or what we have the opportunity to see right in our own backyard. Sometimes I get into some very remote conditions, some very scary conditions. I don't recommend this to happen to people where you're confronted in face-to-face with a grizzly. I have to say this is the time that I was glad that I hadn't seen The Revenant before I had this scene where I was looking this bear face-to-face. But it is the only place in the world that you're able to see these ice grizzlies, and it's in the high Yukon in Canada. And these grizzlies are in a late salmon run. They're fishing, and the air is getting so cold that when the water hits their fur, it freezes. So they walk along, and it's like you could hear a walking chandelier as the time gets colder and colder. I spend a lot of time in the cold. I love the cold, but I also love going to faraway places that are very warm compared to Canada. I do love spending time in remote regions in the Arctic, because in these regions you get to see polar bears and walrus and narwhal, and you get to experience these exotic, wonderful, amazing animals. And with my wildlife photography, I'm always looking for connectivity. I'm always looking for that connection between the animals. Maybe it's the connection to me, but what I'm always looking for is the relationships that you see. And I think, as we said, Ron said it yesterday, when you see a mother with her cubs, we all can relate to that. It humanizes it. And I'm in always search of that connectivity between these animals. Maybe it's a pair of polar bears that are sparring, not necessarily knowing what the behavior is. Are they mouthing? Are they deciding who's big? Are they worthy opponents to spar with? And sometimes you get a really cool shot that is unexpected, because it's a connection between two different animals. Now, the Arctic fox travels alongside the polar bear because they're scavengers, so they're always looking for the leftovers the polar bears make. But at this point, the polar bear was in its kelp bed, and it was, for 4 months, this bear hasn't been eating, and it's just waiting for the ice to come in. So any movement that bear makes, it has to be worth it. And it was really fun to watch how this Arctic fox came up, and they were only a couple of feet away from each other, and they just stared. All the bear could do was look up as the fox had a little dump and then ran away. And all he did was that looked, and that connection between those two animals. Again, it's another mother and a cub, and that beautiful bond that they have, and how she's lying so beautifully and peacefully, and how that cub goes up and snuggles with her. Maybe it's how you're seeing a mother teach its cub how to fish and how to eat the salmon in the water. and that love and that connection between that mother and a cub. Here, the grizzlies are sparring with each other, and they're siblings. They were known to be siblings. But just seeing this connection that they have with each other and that arm embrace. I spent a lot of time with the loons on our lake. I am in Charlotte Lake, Ontario. And this couple, this pair of loon, come back every year. And I have a big yellow kayak, and they're so accepting of me. And they're very, very attentive, and they allow me to get nice and close and personal with them. And for 18 years that I've been on the lake, I have been waiting for them to have chicks, and they were close enough so I could go out in my kayak and I can photograph them. And being in the kayak now with this 500 millimeter and Z7 system, I mean, this just changes everything. This lightweight, amazing camera. This is the combination now that I use all the time. And being able to be sturdy enough in your kayak and to take this out, being quick, agile, and having the ability to have that kind of reach makes all the difference, because you never want to get that close to those animals. Sometimes they're accepting and they come to you. But I waited 18 years to see this loon pair have chicks. But I also knew that it was a fleeting time. You know, those chicks are on the back for only a few days, and I wasn't there. I was going to go to the Arctic, so I only had a limited amount of time. So I go out in all conditions. I go out into the rain. I go out mostly before the sun rises, so I'm out there and I'm ready by the time that the light is perfect. This is a beautiful, if you've ever heard a trumpeter swan and the sound that they make, but just watching her with her cygnets, and she's flapping her feathers because she's getting the water off of her wings, but just this beautiful connection that she has. It's almost like she's protecting. That's the word that comes to my mind when I look at this image. Again, another unlikely pairing between a bee and a painted butterfly. And I went for a walk with my dog at the cottage, and I saw that we had a large influx of painted butterflies. So I took it on. I wanted to challenge myself, and it was really interesting to see how the bees were coming in and forcing the painted butterflies off of, which were a lot of flowers. But it was so cool to watch this interaction. When I got my first D850, and I was so excited to take it out, I had the 200 to 500 on it. I was at the cottage. We arrived, and my son screamed, "Hey, Mom, there's a squirrel with some babies coming out of the tree." So I ran over. She was a little freaked out because we hadn't been there for a few days. She ran up onto the deck, and what was really interesting is that I had never given thought that squirrels actually breastfeed until I saw this photo. It's a pretty voluptuous squirrel, but I had no idea. I never thought of them breastfeeding. And again, that eye-to-eye contact that you can create. Again, in my kayak, you know, I had this raccoon come down. Every morning, I would see him having a drink. And when I got the 500, I had a split second to fire off this image. He ran up the tree, looked at me, and he was gone. I fired off one shot. And being able to pull that camera out so quickly and get this kind of result. But it's that eye-to-eye contact that I think it doesn't have to happen in every image, but when it does, and you're able to connect with that animal, and you drive your viewer into your image. And ultimately, as wildlife photographers, that's what we want people to do. We want them to spend time with your image. You know, we're in Instagram, and we're thumbing through so many images all the time. We're inundated with such amazing imagery. And it's nice when you see people just stop, and then they spend time with your image, and they create their own story within that image. I put this in just because it's, again, the eye-to-eye contact, but you know, you have a lion walking up to you, and it's going straight for you, and you're looking it in the eye, and then it just takes his tongue out and licks his lips. You're like, okay, keep going, buddy. One of the most exciting things for me that happened last year, I spent a lot of time up in Cape Churchill. I work as a resource photographer for a number of Canadian companies. And we were in polar bear land, and we were there to photograph polar bears. And we came across this beautiful fox that was sitting on a snow-covered rock. And at first, I thought I was photographing a silver fox, and I was so excited about seeing a silver fox. And I was like, this isn't looking like a silver fox. But we took photos, And we loved every minute of it. And I did the happy dance in the tundra buggy, and I was like, yeah, we got our silver fox. It was so exciting. And then when I went in, the Polar Bear International guy, Jeff, he walked in and he goes, hey, Michelle, how about that blue fox? It's like, blue fox? You know, I had never heard of a blue fox. So it was one of those very exciting moments for me when you can photograph a new species. And so beautifully, he gave us a wonderful display of hunting and rolling around in the snow. But again, when you're looking at those beautiful eyes and that face-to-face, that eye-to-eye connection that you can create. So I was photographing this. I was shooting with the 800 millimeter, and we had this beautiful great gray, and he was sitting so perfectly in the tree. And I was down low. I was on a tripod, and we were watching this owl, and he wasn't really doing very much. And all of a sudden, he flew off. And he flew right beside me. And I swear his wing touched me. I could hear his wings, and he just flew right by me. And I stood straight ahead going, that was the coolest thing I've ever experienced. That was just an incredible feeling to be that close. And then I kept staring straight ahead, and then my buddy said, Michelle, he's got a vole. So I pivoted around, and he so proudly showed me. Well, I thought it was a female, actually. This is the first time I called it he. And she just showed it to us and then turned sideways and then gulped it down. It was a beautiful, beautiful moment. So another aspect that I try to do with wildlife photography, and what I do with portraits as well, you're looking for expressiveness. And you're looking for those reactions in those eyes. Maybe it's a tilt of the head. This is another ice grizzly. And you could see that I was very close. This was with a 70 to 200. And in these situations, you're sitting on the ground, you're in minus 25 degrees Celsius, and you're not to move. If you move, you're going to startle the bear. The most important thing is that you stay straight, still, you don't talk. But you also have to be prepared with your camera, because you can't do this. That kind of movement can spook the bear. So you had to be ready. Fortunately for me, I was ready, and I had the 70 to 200. And I fired off about 5 shots. And it wasn't until that she opened her mouth that it was a whole different image for me. And that's the one that I show. And it's almost like she was speaking to me. So this one is a very important image for me. And again, that eye-to-eye, that texture that you get on the fur. And you can imagine her walking, sounding like a chandelier, with tink-tink as the ice moved on her fur. I spent a lot of time in the Great Bear Rainforest up in BC. And it's just one of the most extraordinary places in the world. And it has to be one of the most prolific experiences I've ever had in wildlife photography. We were seeing spirit bears, grizzly bears, black bears. We saw orcas. We saw humpbacks. We saw sea otters. There was birds, eagles. It was just a plethora of all this amazing wildlife. And watching the grizzly bears with their cubs. Again, this is the one that was teaching the young to feed on the salmon. And then this is almost like a triptych, you know, everything, there's 3 different images happening here. And it was just the expression on the mom when she looked at me. It's like, aren't you proud of I'm so proud of my girls. Because I think they were girl cubs. Sometimes it's an expression that the bear might put towards you that is not, it's a reminder, I guess, about the power of these creatures. And the respect that we have to have as wildlife photographers when we're out in their environment. Another one that I was photographing in the Great Bear, and it was pouring rain, and this big, big grizzly bear comes walking out of the water, and he goes and he lies on a stump. So unlike the black bear that had this menacing look and it had shown its teeth, this is a much more submissive bear that's lying. And it actually was so heartfelt when I was watching this. It felt like I was photographing in thought of my son. And it was just a really special image. And it provokes a whole different feeling rather than the black bear where it's showing its teeth. This is a spirit bear that just had nothing she wanted to do. She had nothing to do with these black bears that kept coming up to her. And to be this close and to hear the power in her voice when she growled at these bears to stay away. Again, it's that expression and looking for this action, anticipating, watching the behavior in hopes that something like this might happen. I was photographing this leopard seal in this amazing scene in Antarctica, and he was sleeping. It was a beautiful scene, and oftentimes I'll have 2 or 3 cameras with me. I like the longer lens on one, I'll do a wide angle on another, and then I'll have a 70 to 200 on the third camera if I'm able. So I was photographing a wide scene. It was absolutely exquisite to see this leopard seal in its environment. But when I did a close-up, it was like it was just sleeping. There wasn't really much going on. And I asked the Zodiac driver to just wait. And I said, just hesitate just a few minutes until it does something, and then I'll be satisfied. And fortunately, it opened its mouth, and it gave a whole different meaning to the photo. So it's those expressions that I'm always in search of. I put this one in just because it's an angry bunny. And if an image can make you smile or feel something, I just love it. I love the snow, I love the texture, and I just love the way that this bear is staring at me. So comedic, funny. You know, when I put out an image on my Instagram and Facebook, and it was a bear covering its face with its paws. And I asked people to comment on it, and it was so cool to watch and see all these comments that were coming in, and what people feel when they see the image. And if you can put joy in somebody's life by having a really fun image of an animal that we can all relate to somehow, maybe it might remind you of your dog or an animal that you have. This is on Sable Island in Nova Scotia. They have wild horses. And again, that eye-to-eye contact and that funny expression that it has. Or it could be how you feel after Christmas and you've eaten maybe 1 too many turkey dinners. This is how I feel. Or maybe 1 too many desserts. These are prairie dogs up in Saskatchewan. You know, I am a Canadian. I'm a proud Canadian. I'm telling you, we have the most extraordinary places. And I know there's extraordinary everywhere. But I'm so intrigued every time I find a new place to visit and to photograph. And the prairies are so incredibly beautiful. And these prairie dogs, you know, it looks like they're having a little gossip session about the neighbors on the other side that have their hole next to them. You know, so again, creating that fun or looking for those expressions that sometimes just happen and you don't necessarily know when it's going to happen. So this one, you know, I was on a sailboat. We were seeing sea otters. It was really exciting to see sea otters. They're making a comeback. And I had an 800 millimeter on my camera. But I wasn't there to just throw up and start taking pictures. Obviously, it's a massive lens, and it's not something that I usually photograph without a tripod. And we were getting closer and closer to the rocks, so things were starting to move. The boat was moving, but it was just too far away. This otter was too far away. I wanted to bring it close, and I took a chance. I picked up the 800 millimeter. I cranked up my shutter speed, gave a little bit my ISO, and I was able to get a tack-sharp image in a moving boat with an 800 millimeter. So it's always taking those chances, because you never know when you're going to get them again. And in the Great Bear Rainforest, there's tons of seals, but when we were ticketing-booing on our Zodiac, I thought we were coming up to stumps. They looked like stumps. They were so still. They weren't moving at all. And I just love this image. And I think I love it mostly because you have those 8 eyes on you, those 4 set of eyes all staring. And it just brings a smile to my face. So here's a bunch of turkeys. Have you ever seen turkeys fan? As they're mating, they're looking for their mate. I love this image. I absolutely love it. It was just on a street near my house. But what I love most is they're all males. They all have their fans out, but there's not a female in sight. So I'm not sure who they were showing off for, or they were knowing that they were coming in for some, I don't know. I just love this image. And when I was in Iceland last year, and one of the things that I wanted to do is photograph the puffins with the fish in its mouth. And I was on the Zodiac. I had 180 to 400. Not easy to do, right? When you're in a moving Zodiac, you've got a bigger lens. I'm up, and all the people in my Zodiac are like, here's one, here's one. And you know, you're up and looking and photographing. It was really hard. And then I saw them up on the hill, And I was watching their behavior. And as one was jumping off, the others would follow. So I'd find a lineup of the puffins, and I just knew, okay, if one's going to go, they're all going to go. And just so happened that they all jumped at the same time with such funny expression. And I think you could put a name to each one of these, right? Fox are always fun to photograph, watching their behavior. And this one always brings a smile to my face, maybe on a Monday morning when I'm not so interested in working and wanting to go back to the weekend. And polar bears, you'll see, they always make their way into my presentation somehow. And watching their behavior when they're on the ground, when they're walking, when they're hunting, no matter what, the polar bears, anytime I see a polar bear, I get excited. It's like the first time I've ever seen one. And I've spent a lot of time with polar bears. Again, maybe a Monday morning, or how you might feel after a night in Vegas. It just puts smiles on most people's faces. It does mine, and that's what I love about it. And here, you know, a beautiful spirit bear up in the Great Bear Rainforest. And she just happened to look back at me, and she was eating. And somebody on social media asked me why she was sticking her tongue out at me. I thought that was pretty good power if I could make her do that, right? So atmospheric, you know, constantly, and as wildlife photographers, we're always in search of light. My favorite time to go out is the morning, and I think that early morning hours, there's obviously activity. There's activity in the late day as well, but in that early morning hour, the light changes, and it's so beautiful. And I spend as much time as I can out photographing in these beautiful moments. And I go out in snow, I go out in rain. When people are running inside, I'm running outside, as most wildlife photographers do. I was working with those loons with their chicks, and they actually left their chicks, and they were really, really young. And so I was staying almost like I felt like they were saying, will you protect our chicks for us? You make all this stuff up when you're spending time with nature. And so I was with them, it was in a dark situation, and then all of a sudden I looked over, I heard them, and they were in this most magnificent light, the beautiful morning light coming up. So I ran over there with my kayak, and they just both happened to come out at that same time. And sometimes magic happens. In the Great Bear, the scenery is outstanding. There isn't a bad scene that you can see in the mountains, in the rainforest. And this one, for me, even though the eagle plays such a small role in the image frame, it plays such a big role in the message. And as you know, the image without it would have been beautiful, but the fact that the placement of the eagle and where it is, I think it really makes the image that much more powerful. Even going out, and if you're getting into wildlife photography, go out into the backyard, go out into your park, find a pathway, just spend time with nature. And we're here, and you're down south, or you're in the cities, and we're muffled, and we're overstimulated by people, by sounds, by traffic, by cars. And the minute you take yourself and you remove yourself away from that, and you go into nature, you hear differently, because all your senses come alive. You might smell something, you might hear something, and you see differently. So I always am outside looking for that, but I also want that feed off of that time in nature. I think it regenerates and rejuvenates me, as it does so many people. Again, photographing in the rain and the texture on the fur, it's so fascinating. It gives such a different atmosphere, a different feeling to your image when you're photographing these creatures in their environment, but it doesn't always have to be sunny. In fact, most times when I'm in the rainforest and photographing bears, I don't want it to be sunny. I want it to be overcast. I want it to be cloudy. I want it to be raining. This is the spirit bear that didn't like the black bear coming around, and it's almost like she felt safe with us. Again, that's our impression. That's what we took from it. And she was so still. I was watching her. This was taken with the 70-200, the D850, and I was watching her. So she's so still. So I put my camera into a tree because my big lens was with my tripod, and I slowed down my shutter to 1/5 of a second. And I took a few because she moved a couple of times, but I never imagined myself photographing a bear at 1/5 of a second. So I really wanted to show that movement of the water and her environment. She's such a beautiful bear. They call her Ma. And they also say that the indigenous say that if anyone doesn't know, the spirit bear is a Comedic bear. It's only seen in northern BC. And the indigenous legend is that they made, every 10 black bears, they made a white bear to remind the world of the Ice Age. So they're very, very elusive creatures, and it's such an honor, and I'm blessed to be able to photograph them and be in their presence. And again, just using background, always being aware of your background and how your animals fit within that background. And if you have these extraordinary colors and textures, always being aware. And I think one of the things that, because we're so excited when we're photographing, we feel a need to just click, 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 click. And then we take, if you have that time with that animal, if you can take that time and really look at how your background is working with your image. And this is one of those iconic images for me, and it's an island in Nunavut that I went out and I photographed 10,000 walrus, and it became one of those, I didn't know what I was getting when I was shooting. I was just reacting to the movement, and I just started shooting. And it wasn't until I looked on the back of the camera that I said, okay, now I have my Nat Geo photo, and nobody else in the world has this. And that's what we're ultimately always searching for, is that image that you've never seen before, an image that can be one of your signature images. And for me, this is definitely one of those images. This is the leopard seal, that beautiful scene that it was in, and showing the animals in their environment. As much as I love close-up, as much as I love getting the texture and those eye-to-eye and being up close and personal, it's also so amazing to be able to photograph the animals in their environment. And then when they have this beautiful moment, again, going back to that connectivity and that mother and cub. But it also shows you they were on this massive iceberg, and just even the paw prints coming down. A couple of years ago, we saw the bears wait. Sometimes we were watching 12 of them on the side of the on the side of the ice. It was very late, the ice coming in, and it was really sad to actually see all these bears just waiting. They weren't doing very much. They were lying in their kelp beds, and they're just waiting. So, especially with wildlife, I think we have a great gift to give as far as educating, showing people where and what it is that we have in this world, what possibly can go wrong if we don't take better care of the planet, and to be able to just show the bear in this incredibly fragile, raw environment has been one of my goals. And sometimes you get a bear that is diseased. When I was photographing this bear, I thought he had been sparring with another bear, and he was losing his hair. But the other thing about this is there you have the mom and the cubs, and she had actually just charged this bear, which was very unusual. Usually it's the male trying to take on to the cubs. She charged them for no reason. But when we went back, again, I thought it was from the sparring, and the polar bear specialist said, no, it's alopecia. So, in fact, I posted this, and then I was contacted by university, and they're doing more work in finding out why diseases are impacting the Arctic animals. So they're using it in that study. So it's interesting as storytellers, and you don't necessarily know what you're going to get, and when you do get something so important, it can make a difference. It's really a wonderful gift, and that's what I strive for all the time. These last couple of images are probably the hardest images for me. It's not always fun, it's not always beautiful and personal and touching, but sometimes it has a great impact. And this is a polar bear that I was photographing, waiting for the ice to come in. Beautiful scene, beautiful setting light, big healthy bear, and it was eating a plastic oil container. Just one of those images that just struck me, and it became my even greater passion to share with the world what we have to lose if we don't take better care of the plastic. And I vowed at that point, too, to lessen the amount of plastic use that I use. So this year, I went up to Cape Churchill, and the ice came in early. So 2 years ago, the ice was late. This year, the ice came in early. Unfortunately for our guests, they didn't get to see polar bears on the ground because they were all gone. You haven't eaten in 4 months, you'd go to the ice, right? You're not going to wait. So a couple of us were able to go up into the helicopter. And as soon as we went up, my pilot said, there's a mom and a cub. And it was so beautiful to see her in her environment. She was in a hunting pose. The cub was sitting behind her. The beautiful light. It was just absolutely stunning. I turned to my left and I saw another scene. And I've only shown this once before, and I'm not going to show it probably very much, but it's becoming part of my message because it's a very difficult image for me to show because I have never seen this. In all the photographs, all the time that I've spent with polar bears, I have never seen a skinny bear. And for me, this was one of the most touching images that I took this year. And we don't know, there's no reason. I'm not a climologist, I'm not a zoologist, I'm not a biologist, I'm not an environmentalist. But for me as a visual storyteller, being able to showcase this image and say, this is reality. I don't know the reason. I have no idea. Is it a bear that has gone out to the wild to die? Is it old? We don't know. But it was one of those most impactful images for me. So I have a little video I'd like to share with you. And it's just a few more of my images and a little bit about me behind the scenes and the wonderful places that I get to visit. So I'll share that with you now. I think. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be here if anyone has any questions. Enjoy CES, and thanks for tuning in live, everybody.
Ladies and gentlemen,